Once upon a time, there was a person named Shen Ran, who was cleaning the toilet in his house while his wife Lai Zhu was taking a shower. Suddenly, a helicopter arrived at the bathroom window, and a man called the protagonist's boss. The distressed man asked what he was doing there, and the protagonist was surprised. But then he replied with a threatening tone and told him to leave if he didn't have something important to say. He also threatened him if he repeated that scene again. The man apologized for bothering him and informed him that the third sister was looking for him everywhere and would soon find him in China. Meanwhile, the protagonist's wife asked him to bring her towel. The protagonist ignored the report he had just received and told the man that if his wife found out, he would leave him without heirs. The man left, wondering what had happened to the king of the underworld who was feared by everyone. Then, the protagonist brought the towel to his wife and addressed her as Madam. When she was about to take the towel, she told the protagonist that she didn't feel well and collapsed on him, hugging him. This situation made the protagonist nervous because, despite being married, he had never been intimate with her. He thought about how she had a great personality, but despite his greed, he decided to lay her down on the bed first, now that she had fainted, before thinking about lascivious things. After this, the protagonist dressed and tucked his wife in bed, feeling ashamed, but at the same time wondering what could have happened to her, since she always enjoyed good health. He wondered if something had happened to her at work. Meanwhile, Lai was suffering from the effects of a high fever, so the protagonist decided to take matters into his own hands and called a person named Lin Feng, ordering him with great authority to immediately find out what was happening in his sister-in-law's company. The protagonist then stated that now that Lai was back to normal, and with him, he would not allow anyone to harm her. He recalled that when he was young, a brown-haired girl said goodbye to him but promised that someday, when they were adults, she would be his wife. However, when he reunited with her, Lai Zhu had suffered a car accident and lost her memory. As the protagonist remembered this, he received a call from his subordinate, informing him that his sister-in-law's company had produced a new cosmetic product, and their first batch had been stolen the previous night, leaving them with no time to produce a new one. The protagonist, exasperated, told his subordinate to stop telling him unnecessary things and get to the point of who did it. The subordinate then informed him that it was his sister-in-law's former boss, named Chen Guang, and that the stolen batch was transported to an abandoned cosmetics factory on the outskirts of the city's north. When they arrived at the factory, Chen was preparing to distribute the cosmetics and split the profits, but the protagonist arrived in anger and told them they had no chance. One of the guards attempted to stop him, but the protagonist effortlessly overpowered him. The other guards attacked him, but he quickly defeated them and stood firm in front of Chen, who trembled and claimed not to remember offending him. The protagonist responded that by messing with Lai Zhu, Chen had messed with him. Chen calmed down and said that even though he would help him now, he would not give him another chance to help Lai Zhu in the future. The protagonist grabbed him by the collar with great hatred and responded that he would not give him another chance and began to strangle him. Chen, scared, attempted to intimidate him with the law and threatened that if he killed him there, he would be pursued. Then the protagonist tells him that he doesn't need to do anything illegal, but he will make him suffer something worse than death in life. Throwing him to the ground, he tells him that he will give him one chance, ordering him to return all the stolen cargo to his wife's company in the morning, apologize personally, compensate for the losses, and pay him 10 times the value of the product. Only then will he forgive him and act as if nothing had happened. The foolish Chen suggests that he will never stoop that low, and the most he will allow is to take the cargo, because the rest is just nonsense. Even if it involves the police, he is not afraid of them. The protagonist sighs and confirms the name of Chen's cosmetics company. In his mind, Chen trusted that the protagonist could not do anything to him, even thinking about having him killed. Then, with great elegance, the protagonist tells him that it's a pity that his company will be closing on that same day. Upon such a threat, Chen cannot help laughing maniacally, mocking the protagonist like a dog and challenging him to see what he can do. Then the protagonist makes a call to ensure that before the stock market closes, Chen's company's shares are eliminated. Chen, angered, belittles the protagonist, implying that with just a phone call, he cannot bring them down. However, the protagonist remains confident in his power and takes some cigarettes from one of Chen's men. At that moment, Chen receives a sudden call informing him alarmingly that his shares have dropped by 30%. Chen is alarmed and doesn't understand how it happened. His employee informs him that many shareholders have sold their shares, causing the shares to drop drastically. Then, frightened, Chen asks the protagonist for his identity, but the protagonist ignores the question and tells him that if he wants his company not to go bankrupt and wants him to withdraw his people, he must comply with his conditions. Then, scared, Chen exclaims that he will do everything he is told but begs to be left alone. Then the protagonist threatens Chen again, conditioning him to comply the next morning or else he will ruin his company. With much fear, Chen humbles himself and prostrates before the protagonist, asking why he did what he promised. The protagonist orders his people to release Chen's company until further notice, and his man mentions that they did it just in time before the stock market closed. As the protagonist begins to leave the company, he reminds Chen that it's the only chance he'll give him, and if he doesn't comply, he'll have to face the consequences. At that moment, Chen's phone rings again, and one of his employees informs him that the stocks in the stock market have stabilized and show signs of slowly increasing. The employee also adds that they received a threat to not offend dangerous people, or they will destroy their entire organization next time. Then, Chen, with sugar-coated words, says he understands, wondering what kind of person he got involved with. When Lai Zhu wakes up, she receives information that the entire lot that had been stolen had been returned, with not a single bottle missing. Excited, Lai Zhu asks to examine the quality of the products and to keep the merchandise under complete surveillance. Then, Lai wonders who could have helped her and taken the weight off her shoulders. She blushes upon seeing the protagonist sweeping, then asks him to bring a tub for her to wash up. When the protagonist brings it to her, Lai asks him to help her wash up, and he gets excited and heated, giving her a foot massage. But something happens that embarrasses Lai yet sweetens the moment. After this, Lai arrives in her car and upon being received by one of her employees, she is informed that Chen has been waiting for her for some time in his room. However, she asks what he wants, but at the same time says she is busy and asks to be told to leave. Although the employee says that she saw Chen nervous but with a good attitude, Lai agrees to talk to him, asking what he wants from a terrified Chen, and he bows and hands her an envelope, apologizing for what he did and offering her money as compensation, adding that he does not want her company to close. Then, upon hearing the word revenge, Lai thinks that someone is helping her and asks who it could be. At that moment, the protagonist sneezes while doing housework, and while wiping his nose, he gets excited at the thought that maybe his wife thinks he could be her husband. Then he receives a call from Ling from last time and asks the reason for the call. Ling informs him that while investigating Jiao's company, they found information about his sister-in-law, and apparently someone has been targeting their company for some time. The protagonist asks for a name and if they have already made their move, and they inform him that they will do it the next day but hired a group of hitmen on the deep web. But they could not find anything, even though 5 brothers hacked this page. At that moment, the protagonist's wife arrives and informs him that she will accompany him to dinner the next day and tells him to dress formally. The protagonist asks where she will take him, and Lai, blushing, scolds him while pointing because he always asks too many questions. So she makes a gesture and turns her back, being upset. But the protagonist is still in love with her, thinking that as long as he can take care of her, nothing else matters, saying that someday he will recover his memories. The next day, the protagonist and his wife arrive at the Western Muir restaurant with great elegance, and Lai asks the protagonist to relax and not embarrass her. Lai takes the protagonist's arm and asks why he is so nervous, to which the protagonist responds that it is because she has never taken his arm before. Inside the restaurant, a man greets Lai Zhu and thanks her for accepting the dinner despite her busy schedule. However, upon noticing the presence of the protagonist, he asks who he is. Lai Zhu answers that he is her husband and asks if there is a problem with him accompanying them. The man expresses that there is no problem and praises the protagonist for marrying someone like Lai Zhu, believing that he must be very wealthy. The protagonist and the man shake hands, but the man becomes angry and tries to humiliate the protagonist for coming to the dinner. The protagonist maintains his composure and asks about the man's income, thinking that it must also be high. The man with glasses squeezes the protagonist's hand harder, believing that the protagonist is resisting his strength well but will soon be embarrassed. However, the protagonist, who is a member of the basketball team, smiles and humbly says that he does not earn much. He returns the handshake with more force, causing the man with glasses pain. Lixu then asks them to order dinner, and the man with glasses focuses on the meal. However, he cannot help but wonder how strong the protagonist must be. As they are ordering, someone points a gun at Lixu's face. A sniper prepares to shoot, while the protagonist skillfully places an order for their dinner, requesting kebabs, chicken, caviar, fish, and a beef stew. He then asks the guy with glasses if he needs help ordering his food. But using his hawk-like vision, the protagonist spots the presence of the sniper aiming at his wife. Without causing a commotion, the protagonist steps on Lixu's foot, causing her to move out of the bullet's trajectory. However, she doesn't realize the bullet until it hits the restaurant waiter's head with full force, alerting the diners who panic. The protagonist pretends to be completely terrified and runs away. Lixu tries to stop him and asks him to crouch down, but a policewoman takes her cover and orders her to accompany her to get her out of there. Lixu was worried about her husband without realizing that she was being aimed at again, but the officer manages to see the weapon or bullets flash and takes Lixu out of the trajectory again. The sniper gets angry because he lost sight of her. Then the protagonist praises the sniper for his skill, surprised that someone with that level is in that organization. The sniper reacts and turns to aim at the protagonist with his rifle, asking for the protagonist's identity and how he knows about their organization. But the protagonist had moved with greater speed and had gotten behind him, and in a blink of an eye, the protagonist snatches the gun from him, frightening the sniper with the protagonist's speed. Then the protagonist threatens him to give him the name of who hired him to kill Lixu. The sniper says he won't tell anything, claiming that as long as he remains silent, the protagonist won't be able to kill him. But the word was still in his mouth when the protagonist pulled the trigger of the rifle, shooting him directly in the head. Then, the protagonist cleans his fingerprints from the weapon and expresses that it was all a waste of time, leaving the rifle next to the sniper's corpse. As he descends the building, people are agitated at the sight of so many police officers. They soon discover the sniper's body and, terrified to see him dead, they wonder who could have killed him. Then, the protagonist meets his wife, acting joyfully to find her safe and sound. But as he approaches her, Lixu angrily slaps him and tearfully asks how he could abandon her in that situation, calling him a coward and adding, between tears, that she was worried about him. Then the officer interrupts the scene and formally introduces herself to the protagonist, informing him that she suspected the killer was after his wife and asking him to accompany her to the station to give his testimony. The protagonist agrees to go, praising the officer's skill in his mind. Late at night, the officer thanks the protagonist for his cooperation and, aware of the time, requests a patrol car to escort them home. Inside the car, Lixu continues to be upset, makes a gesture to the protagonist and turns her back on him. Then the protagonist's phone rings, and he checks to see what it is. It's a message from his subordinates warning him to be careful because the assassins plan to ambush him at his house. Upon receiving the news, the protagonist tells his wife that he has a stomachache and asks her to let him go to the bathroom first. Inside herself, Lixu doesn't know what to do with him and becomes tired of him for being so stupid and cowardly. She thinks about talking to her father about getting a divorce. The protagonist heads towards the building and challenges the assassins to come out and face him. They rush at him with knives, but the protagonist remains unmoved and adjusts the sleeve of his jacket before defeating them without much effort. Then he enters the building and indicates that his hunch tells him that the man inside is the boss. The man congratulates the protagonist for finding him quickly and admires his skills, but with his pride high, he tells the protagonist that he will give him the opportunity to bow down to him 3 times, and then he will spare his life. The protagonist also tells him that he has the opportunity to clean his footprints from the floor of his living room and voluntarily tell him who hired him to kill his wife. The assassin boss mocks the protagonist for what he asked, and the protagonist, without further words, beats him up. While on the ground, the protagonist humiliates him by stating that even though he is the 27th greatest assassin in the world, in the underworld, he wouldn't even make the top 100. He orders him to spit out the name of the person who hired him. The assassin boss asks the protagonist for his identity, and the protagonist steps on him and hands him a card, telling him that he will only give him that one opportunity. The assassin, after discovering the protagonist's identity, is shocked and exclaims that it would be an honor for the protagonist to kill him. But before that, he will tell him all the information so that his name will go down in history in the underworld. Then the assassin reveals the name of the person who hired him, Fei Long. Then the protagonist expresses that it is time to kill him. He then makes a call to one of his subordinates to send someone to take the body away and search the deep web for someone with the name of the person who wants to kill his wife. Within seconds, they manage to hack the system and uncover everything related to this man. The protagonist is annoyed because they already had the information and he could have gone to kill him instead of wasting time. He describes the man as a young entrepreneur who is one of the most important people in China, but they do not know the reasons why he wants to kill the protagonist's wife. Then the protagonist instructs them to look for more information about this man, and now that he has been so foolish as to try to take the life of his wife, he will take his own. At that moment, the protagonist's wife enters, and as if nothing had happened, he welcomes her and says that he took the time to clean and organize everything for the guests. But his wife, filled with rage, kicks him out of the mansion. The protagonist asks if he can at least make her lunch, and Lixu, with tears in her eyes, tells him that if he doesn't leave, she will. The protagonist is impressed and considers that he should be in the mansion to protect her better. With great sadness, the protagonist leaves, while his wife also sadly watches her husband go. Lixu questions what is wrong with her and why she is treating him this way, lamenting that he didn't stay with her when the morning incident happened and asking why he ran away. Meanwhile, the protagonist, sitting under a tree, doesn't know how they ended up like this and wants to talk to his father-in-law. When he calls him, his father-in-law scolds him for what he has been doing, blaming him for allowing a sniper to almost kill his daughter, and scolding him for promising to protect her. Then the protagonist decides to tell him what really happened when he left Lixu's side. His father-in-law calms down and understands what really happened, saying that he trusts him and that he will send bodyguards to take care of Lixu, although he doesn't think they will take care of her as well as the protagonist does. The protagonist asks his father-in-law to help him get back into the mansion, and his father-in-law says he will help him this time, but tells him not to let it happen again because he doubts he will be able to help him again. The protagonist promises him that it won't happen again, then tells his father-in-law that he will end the call, which angers his father-in-law. Meanwhile, Lixu drives at full speed to talk to her father about discussing divorce with the protagonist. Lixu arrives at her father's house and rings the bell, and a brown-haired girl who Lixu doesn't seem to know answers the door. She wonders why she's at her father's house and the girl asks Lixu to follow her. Lixu's father asks her what she's doing there so early and if she's had breakfast. With teary eyes, Lixu exclaims to her father that she wants to divorce the protagonist. Her father knows what happened at the restaurant and tells her not to worry about it. He also introduces Bingzu, the girl who will be her bodyguard from now on. Lixu angrily says she'll stay with her, but in exchange, she must divorce the protagonist. Then her father tells her that if she divorces him, the protagonist will take 50% control of the company according to the marital agreements. He suggests that if she agrees, she should transfer the shares to the protagonist, but Lixu tries to complain and says in her mind that he had left her alone. Her father tells her to leave because he doesn't want to discuss the matter anymore. The protagonist is excited because his father-in-law said he could come back, but Lixu doesn't seem happy. The protagonist says he has already cooked the food, and they should eat first. While they dine, Lixu continues to tell him that she has a reception the next night and needs him to accompany her. The protagonist eagerly accepts and says goodbye to his wife, wishing her a good day, and saying he'll wait for her to come pick him up at night. But in reality, the protagonist decides to return to a place he hasn't visited in 6 months. Upon arrival, he is greeted by one of his aliases, who tells him that he doesn't need to send money to that orphanage anymore because they can never spend it all since he sends so much. The protagonist saves the dean of the orphanage from a bus that passed by at full speed. The protagonist noticed that there were children inside the bus, so he yelled at them not to be afraid and that he would help them. However, when he saw how the driver was driving like a madman, he wondered if he was crazy. The driver had his entire face battered. The protagonist jumped through one of the windows and immediately saw that the driver was totally drunk. Then, a scared child told the protagonist that there was a car in front of them. The protagonist analyzed the situation and pulled the driver out of his seat and stepped hard on the brakes, stopping the car at the last moment. The other driver made a gesture with his finger, shouting at him to learn how to drive. The protagonist sighed and asked the passengers if they were okay. But then, a very scared girl hugged the protagonist and told him that she was okay. The protagonist accidentally touched the girl's breasts, causing her to step back. He apologized, and then the other girls praised him for saving them. The protagonist confirmed that everyone was okay, and told them to go back to the old dean, who was worried. Then the girls introduced the protagonist to the girl he had touched, telling her that he was a friend of the dean. The girl introduced herself as Kai Shiru, a teacher of the children, and thanked him for saving them. Then the protagonist tells her that, as the adult in charge, she needs to be more careful. Shiru blushes, but she thinks that if the dean finds out what happened, she will be fired because the protagonist will report her. However, the protagonist joyfully tells the children not to tell the dean about what happened on the bus because he is too old for such scares. The children agree not to say anything. The way the protagonist handled things makes Shiru sad about what she had thought about him again. The dean of the orphanage calms down in tears because the children are safe, asking them to come inside the orphanage. Then the protagonist tells the dean that he now lives closer by and will visit more often. But the dean refuses his offer. The protagonist leaves, saying goodbye because he has some business to attend to and asks the dean to take care of his health. Then, Shiru, confused, asks if he was also with them at the orphanage. The dean confirms it and tells Shiru about the protagonist's childhood. It seems that Shiru knew the protagonist before, and she thinks about properly thanking him another time. Then, Lixu tells the protagonist that they have an important offer at night and asks him to behave and not say anything stupid. She hands him a bag with the clothes she wants him to wear and orders him to change quickly. The protagonist happily obeys, wearing a white tuxedo that he likes a lot. When he goes to see his wife to check if she is ready, he sees her in a beautiful white dress that leaves him stunned. Although Lixu is also blushing, she tells the protagonist to stop drooling and get going. At the reception, Lixu reminds the protagonist not to speak foolishly and not to cause any scandals. When the man who had dinner with them last time arrives, he compliments Lixu and mocks the protagonist for running away when they fired the shots. However, the protagonist responds with a more humiliating insult, angering the man with glasses. Another man stops the man with glasses, but upon seeing the protagonist at the banquet, this man would humiliate him for being someone from a low position. Then Lixu comes to her husband's defense, arguing that he is also part of her company, so both of them are concerned about the proposal they will receive. The man throws an insult at the protagonist again, calling him incompetent and telling Lixu that she should have brought her father to win the offer. The protagonist challenges them to make a bet to see who will get the final offer. The man insults the protagonist again, claiming that he is not in a position to bet against him. The protagonist asks if he is afraid and the man falls into the trap, saying that he is not afraid. The protagonist proposes a condition that the loser will have to give 40% of their profits to the winner's company for 3 years, which scares Lixu because it means the loser will have to pay 40 million yuan monthly to the winner. The man accepts, but the protagonist says that he is not done negotiating yet. The man asks if he regrets it and the protagonist says that he has not changed his mind, but wants to make it public to everyone present. The man yells at the protagonist and calls him stupid for betting against someone like him. Lixu tries to make sure that the protagonist is aware of what he did, but the protagonist claims to have a stomach ache and leaves. The protagonist goes to the second floor of the VIP lounge and knocks on the door of someone he knows who invites him in and offers him a cup of tea. The man is one of the 3 leaders of the cosmetics company Shuaimai, named Hills. When the protagonist enters, he discovers that Hills was watching content to masturbate. The protagonist mocks Hills, saying that he has not changed at all and always watches that kind of video when he drinks tea. Hills asks him not to tell anyone, so the protagonist sits down and tells Hills that a cosmetics company will be bidding on the offer that Hills' company will be giving, and he asks him to let them win. Hills then asks him to be honest and asks if the company is reliable or if it has anything to do with him. While sipping his tea, the protagonist tells Hills that the company belongs to his father-in-law and wife, and he asks Hills if he thinks it's safe. Hills, surprised, agrees to give the victory to the protagonist's wife's company, although he cannot help but feel nostalgic that the protagonist got married and asks to meet her at the end of the party, throwing flowers at her because he believes she must be a beauty for the protagonist to have accepted to marry her. The protagonist drinks his tea, receiving the compliment with pride, and once he finishes his tea, he leaves everything in the hands of his friend. But then Hills tells the protagonist that he will now have to help him, telling him that he lost contact with his daughter and heard that she's in the city, so the protagonist promises to help him find her. Hills silently asks the protagonist to value what he will do for him. Back at the party, the protagonist eats like a child while his wife is anxious and wonders how he can eat so calmly as if they have already won the bet. Behind them, some gossipers mock the protagonist for being confident despite the fact that if he loses, the Zhao family will not let him go due to the huge losses he would be generating for his father-in-law's company. However, they fall silent when Hills arrives to announce the winner. Hills calls the 3 companies that made it to the second round, including the protagonist's wife's company, although many speculated that they would leave her out because the first 2 were of high prestige. The man with glasses, despite his anger, tries to calm down, saying that they only made it to the second round. The protagonist, taking advantage of his confidence, mocks the man with glasses, and then the man's son suggests that they increase the bet and the protagonist accepts without hesitation. The man with glasses' son proposes that the loser must kneel before the winner and declare themselves trash in front of everyone. But the protagonist asks if his father will not be a part of that bet. The man with glasses' son says that his father will not be involved, and the protagonist says he can do whatever he wants, as he has no problem with it. Then Hill congratulates the finalists and instructs them to give new offers, noting how much they will invest in his corporation and how much profit they wish to receive, promising to review with justice and impartiality, and then announce the winner. Lixu gets nervous as she never considered the possibility of making it to the second round. Then the protagonist takes his wife's word and asks her to let him take care of it since he has a winning proposal. After a while, Hill announces that the 3 companies have given their offers, and they will now announce the winner, presenting the proposals of the 3 companies and eliminating one of the winners, leaving the protagonists and the glasses guy's potential companies. Upon hearing the announcements, the glasses guy thinks he will win, but to his surprise, Hill comments that the proposal from the protagonist's company is the most favorable, announcing it as the winner. Then the glasses guy exclaims that there was cheating in the selection, insulting Hill with strong words. Then his father tells him to calm down and leave, but the protagonist stops them and asks the glasses guy to fulfill their agreement. Then the father of the glasses guy argues that they will pay for it, trying to escape. So the protagonist tells the glasses guy's father that he can leave, but his son made a bet, and he will not let him go until he fulfills it. Lixu tries to prevent the protagonist from provoking him, because the guy with the glasses is connected to the underworld. But the protagonist tries to blackmail them with his honor and prestige. However, the guys with the glasses threaten him for the way they are humiliating them. Nonetheless, the protagonist insists that he won't let go of the guy with the glasses until he fulfills his promise. The guy with the glasses tells the protagonist that because of this humiliation, he accepts the challenge. In response, the protagonist orders his wife's bodyguard to take her to the 2nd floor, telling her that he will be with her in 10 minutes. Lixu becomes worried about what is about to happen. Then, the guy with the glasses orders his henchmen to tear off all of the protagonist's limbs, but to leave him alive. Meanwhile, outside of the building, Lixu struggles with her bodyguard to let her go and help her husband. However, as she refuses to let her go, Lixu ends up slapping her, claiming that only she has the power to insult or hit him, so she won't allow anyone to harm him. She runs quickly to where the protagonist was, but she comes across something that left her stunned, shuddering as she sees that the guy with the glasses was lying prostrate in front of the protagonist, admitting that he was useless and begging him to forgive him. So, Lixu calls the protagonist and he acts as if nothing is happening, asking him what he's doing there and suggesting they go home instead. Then, the guy with glasses confronts the protagonist, saying they haven't finished yet, and that he'll make him pay for the humiliation he made his family go through that day. But the protagonist looks at him coldly and tells him to try and face him again if he has the balls to do so. Then, Lixu asks the protagonist fearfully what he has done, claiming that now that he has humiliated them in that way, they won't sit idly by, and asking if he is aware of what that could imply. But the protagonist, with a sweet face, hands her a contract from the Hills company, which she had already signed, but only needed her signature to make it official. Lixu is surprised that they will be giving her more benefits than agreed upon, but the protagonist says he might have made a mistake. However, Lixu suspects that the protagonist knows Hills, but he doesn't deny it, but he still gives her all the credit for her leadership. Lixu receives a call from her mother, and she asks if she shouldn't be asleep by now since it's late. Then Lixu's mother invites her to a family dinner, but asks her not to bring her useless husband. Lixu sighs and says she understands, and the protagonist becomes a little uncomfortable. But Lixu takes his hand and blushingly tells him that she doesn't care what her mother says and asks him to accompany her. Then the protagonist looks at her, shocked and blushing, and agrees to accompany her. The next day, the protagonist and Lixu arrive at the lady's house with a basket of fruit, and Lixu announces their arrival. But when the mother-in-law comes out to receive them, she does so with annoyance and without hiding it, and asks the protagonist directly what he's doing there. If you've made it to this part of the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to get here. So, comment the word boss in the comments. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. That being said, see you in the next video.